Loving the energy on this Monday morning. Thank you all for bringing so much life to the space.
Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for setting the space and for bringing your own light in life. We appreciate it, everybody. Good energy.
We need it.
hmm We especially need that money winning energy. Come on, girl.
Trust those instincts. Yes.
Yes.
Call the uncle and trust the instincts. both, both hands.
These days, yeah.
hmm We all need that lifeline.
Yes, that's right. We need the lifeline. We need the audience. Ask the audience. What's the other one?
Mhm.
Call a friend, all of that. Mhm.
Okay, it's 104. So if you all can mute yourselves, and then I'll start. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us today. Um, so before I start, just want to point out something that we don't have a captioner with us today, but we will have one for the next webinars in the series. And we will try to, as much as we can, edit the YouTube captioning once this webinar or once this recording is on YouTube. Sometimes YouTube gets a little funky. All right, so thank you for joining us today for the Anti-Racism as Organizational Compass series. I am Lisette Martinez, the Network and Learning Coordinator at the National Guild for Community Arts Education. You can refer to me in conversation by name or by she, her, hers. I'm a light-skinned person with some neutral undertones. I have short, blunt bangs across my forehead. There's some forest green highlights, which are very new as of 24 hours ago. I have long, dark hair with dark brown, black roots, and there's more forest green towards the end. Um, I have dark brown eyes and thick, dark eyebrows. I have a pear-shaped face and full cheeks and 3 flat moles on my left cheek. Currently, I'm wearing a gray long sleeve with a crew neck collar. I have a gold necklace on that sometimes peeks out with charms that my mom has given me throughout my life. I'm also wearing some black over-the-ear headphones. And behind me are some beige walls. A white wardrobe is on my left, and there's a ceiling fan right above me that you can, that's there. And so I'm joined today by an incredible group of speakers, and they'll introduce themselves in just a moment. I'm meeting you today from the unceded land of the Canarsie and Munsee Lenape peoples. I ask you to join me in honoring these first peoples, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. The National Guild also recognizes that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including the Lenape on whose land the institution is located. I also acknowledge the trauma that colonialism caused both Indigenous and enslaved African people, not only through slavery, biological warfare, forced sterilization, and forced assimilation, but via structural racism, which allows these racist systems to continue to oppress their descendants today. We honor those. Let's just pause there. We honor those who have lived and are living at these intersections of identity and experience. This acknowledgement is a commitment to beginning the process of dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. So the anti-racism series, the Anti-Racism as Organizational Compass Dialogue series is a series of 75-minute long intimate fishbowl conversations with 6 Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led arts organizations that center anti-racism in organizational mission and practice. Your video, audio, and chat is disabled, so if you want to send love or questions to our speakers, please use the Q&A box. However, this is a reminder that these are fishbowl conversations and we may get to one question if time allows. Reflection sessions provide co-learning, which is where you can bring any questions or feelings, emotions that you weren't able to express today. You can bring that into those reflection sessions. Each of our conversations, including today, will be facilitated by Masharika Prejean Maddison, founder of Lightwell Coaching and Consulting. Our follow-up reflection sessions will be led by Toya Lillard, Executive Director of Vibe Theater Experience. The reflection session for today's conversation will be tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, and I'll send a registration link for that after the webinar. Today, we will hear from staff of Ashé Cultural Arts Center, including Asali DeVan Ecclesiastes and Frederick Delahoussaye, who is also known by Wood. We are being supported by Pro Bono ASL, Roy Burton and Selena Flowers will be our ASL interpreters. And please send some good energy to our whole team today. This virtual learning series is brought to you by the Music Command Foundation. And thank you for being here today. I'll now pass it to Masharika.
Thank you so much, Lisette. Hi, everyone. I'm Masharika Prejean Maddison. A brief description of me. I have short, curly, dark brown hair, and as my teeny weeny afro grows, the curls become more and more unwieldy and have a mind of their own. I have dark caramel colored skin, and I wear eyeglasses to enhance my vision. I have a big smile on my face this morning as I look out at Asali and Wood, and I'm just so excited for this conversation that we are about to have. I'm also wearing a fuzzy gray vest to keep me warm. I'm coming to you from some chillier temperatures in Northern California on the land of the Washoe people, whose spirit is still very alive and present here at Lake Da'oe. In the background, I have pictures actually of Lake Da'oe, commonly known today as Lake Tahoe. And I also am sitting in front of some neutral colored walls where the paintings are not covering that space. Asali and Wood would love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves, your names, your audio descriptions, and your land acknowledgements as you see fit. Asali, why don't we start with you?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Asali DeVan Ecclesiastes. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am coming to you from the land of Bobancha, also known as New Orleans, but known as the land of many tongues to our indigenous ancestors. Wood will give you a more thorough land acknowledgement, and I enjoy hearing his so much I limit mine to the name. I'm a dark brown woman with golden undertones. I love my defined eyebrows and cheekbones. I have on a little red lip gloss today to match my red sweater. I'm wearing gold earrings in the shape of Africa, matched by a chain of the same, a pendant on a chain. And I have long brown locks that are now pulled back from my face. And I'm the CEO of the Ashé Cultural Arts Center, the new CEO. I started in January, taking on the legacy of the great Carol B. Bell, who co-founded our institution with our beloved ancestor, Douglas Fred, who was the founding artistic director. And with that, I will turn it over to the current artistic director, Frederick Delahoussaye, who we all lovingly call Wood. You're still on mute, Wood.
Technology. Greetings, family. Thank you, Asali, so much for that introduction, and thank you for you all folks who are in the space. My name is Frederick Delahoussaye, as she said, lovingly known as Wood. It's my pleasure to serve as the Chief Creative Officer and Artistic Director of the Ashé Cultural Arts Center down in New Orleans, Louisiana. I am what I like to call a honey butter brown brother. So light-skinned brother, and I have lovingly, my grays are becoming, my goatee, as they say, but I do not have any hair on my head, so bald and beautiful. I want to deliver a land acknowledgement only because we want to affirm the historical legacy of colonialism by honoring and paying respect to the land which was taken by conquest, along with the domination of the people who inhabited the land and the imposition of white supremacy. We do land acknowledgements to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty, cultural rights, just as a small step toward equitable relationships and reconciliation. So, as Asali mentioned, Bobancha, the land of many tongues, we gather on the ancestral lands of the Atacapa Ishak, the Caddo, the Chitimacha, Choctaw, Houma, Natchez, the Tunica peoples, as well as the Petite nations. And then we also recognize the Alabama, the Biloxi, the Cosada, the Ofo peoples, and the others who were pushed into Louisiana from their ancestral lands. And we invite all of you in attendance and in the sound of our voice, and those who are watching, to learn with us about the Native and Indigenous people, histories, and present-day communities, not only in Louisiana, but of this nation. And when we do this land acknowledgement and acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism, we also acknowledge the non-Western ways of knowing that holistically link mind, body, and spirit, and link the human and non-human ways of knowing. We acknowledge that the space that we are in, the land we are on, are part of who we are and how we know the world. It also allows us to ask questions about what it means to be in a post-colonial world. What does it take for us to get here? How can we be accountable to our part in that history? Questions about whose knowledge gets to be named, whose knowledge gets to be validated, honored, legitimized, and whose knowledge gets erased is the other important question. And in that acknowledgement, that space we inhabit shapes who we know, what we consider to be knowledge, and how knowledge is constructed. So I give thanks for you all to letting us be here, and then also give thanks to the nations and tribes who were the original inhabitants of this land, once occupied what is now known as Louisiana, but also the original inhabitants of the Mississippi River Delta and the Gulf Coast. So thank you again, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Asali, you meant what you said. Thank you. Thank you both for being here today. It's such a pleasure. Are we ready to get started, to have a conversation?
Let's begin.
As they say, let's talk, okay? So my first question is for both Asali and Wood. I would love to hear how each of you are defining anti-racism in this moment, and would also love to learn a bit more about who and what have been some key contributors toward the development of your respective anti-racism practices.
Mm-hmm. I'll start if that's okay, Wood.
Please.
All right. So, for me, anti-racism is about the equal application of energy, resources, strategies that have been applied to the creation and outcomes of racism, right? It's not something that exists just at this moment. It's part of a continuum. And so in order for us to be anti-racist, we have to adjust it as such. And we have to come at it with equal energy. We have to be just as inventive and creative and relentless, right, in our application of energy against racism, as are the folks who apply energy towards creating racism and racist outcomes.
And Asali, just to build on that definition, who and what helped you to shape that understanding?
Sure. So my influences are many. So my mother, is a great part of my sensibilities around identifying when something is racist, right? Like in my formation as a young person. But I would say my intellectual understanding of it, James Baldwin was a big contributor to my views about the insidiousness and the systematic nature of racism and how it plays out on everyday life, right? And how that contributes to the experience and the quality of life that we have as Black folk. And, and among him, lots of other writers, were very pivotal. And then in the academic sense, there's an organization called Policy Link who does just really, when I first got into government work, I went to one of their conferences, right? And it was a conference in LA, and like every subject that I ever cared about, like somebody was in there talking about it in a not somebody's, many experts in data filled ways, and that was just exciting to me as someone whose view around it had always been kind of artistically shaped. And so to get social scientists and practitioners and different kinds of experts view on the issue, it has brought me to where I am now with my understanding of how art and culture can shift those outcomes that they gave me the articulation for.
And we'll talk more about how you see the intersection of arts and policy playing out in a little bit. So I'm just going to put a bookmark on that thought, and would turn the mic over to you. How are you defining anti-racism in this moment, and who and what have helped to shape your anti-racism practice?
Sure. So for me, I think anti-racism is simply the persistent and effective dismantling of systems, structures, symbols, privileges, everyday practices that continue to establish, normalize, and reinforce white supremacy, systemic injustice, and oppression. And I think anti-racism begins, with a brutal accountability of what has happened, and also includes a healthy diet of education and understanding. So with that, I also mentioned, like Asali mentioned, James Baldwin was a major contributor to, I think, the teachings of anti-racism, along with Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, all those different phenomenal folks. And then locally, Baba Kalama Yasalam, Tom Dent, Jerome Smith. We have some civil rights titans who speak the language of anti-racism, walking amongst us in New Orleans. So I think all of those folks really contributed to my understanding of what anti-racism means, and then how it goes hand in hand with the work for upliftment of our community and our folks.
I love that you just spoke the name of New Orleans, because that really is the central piece of where I hope we can go next in our conversation. On Ashé's website, you very clearly articulate that the average median income of a New Orleanian is about $36,000. Let that sink in. And then you go on to say that Indigenous artists and culture bearers earn $17,500 a year. That's half of the median income. Let that sink in.
Right.
And this is in a context where your artists, your Indigenous artists and culture bearers are really supporting the fueling of a tourism industry that cleared $10 billion in 2019. So the disparities are quite great. So given the inextricable link between race and class, would you each share a bit about an anti-racist effort that's underway at Ashé Cultural Arts Center that's explicitly supporting equitable economic development in New Orleans? How are y'all addressing this?
Wow. We're trying to address it on a few levels. I'm going to speak to a particular project that we're just getting launched. We haven't come up with the jazzy name for it yet, but it's a collaborative of organizations and institutions that are led by Black folks and other marginalized groups. So it's Black-led organizations, Latino and Latina-led organizations. We have the United Homa Nation, who's a part of it, the LGBTQ Archive. And what we are looking at is the disparity in funding between our organizations and what are considered the core cultural institutions of the city, which are all white led. And in those numbers that you gave out, I'd like to point out, and I should add this to the website, that the average median income for a white New Orleanian is $63,000, right? It's only $36,000 because Black folks are so poor and entrenched in poverty, right? I happen to be a 1%er in my neighborhood, with my, nonprofit job and my good government job before that, in the community that I was born and raised in. And trust me, y'all, I have no trappings of a 1%er, but because of the poverty in my community, I happen to earn the top 1% of salaries. That is not something that can be fixed by people, pulling up their bootstraps. We have to look at the systemic nature of these things. So our collaborative is doing a research project to demonstrate the inequity in funding, both on the city, municipal level, the philanthropic level, and the federal level. Often I am in meetings where I'm the only Black person in a group of cultural institutions in the city of New Orleans. And I don't need to explain to anyone what the culture of New Orleans is, because it is what it's known for, as evidenced by the fact that tourism is our biggest industry. And that tourism is based on the cultural products of the very people who are kept in the worst economic conditions. So what we are hoping is that by demonstrating and really concretely showing the bias in the law, that we can then advocate to our policymakers to make differences in how they actually dole out funding, and make them accountable to the fact that you are supporting the endeavors of the minority of our population because we are the majority population, in our city, and yet and still don't get the resources appropriated equitably. And that is with Black leadership, so as an example of the systemic nature of the supremacy, that it does not have to be, you don't need whiteness to enforce supremacy. And that's clearly displayed in how laws are made and enforced in the city of New Orleans.
Yeah, and I'll speak to another program which we call Community Spread, which was the brain trust of our dear Chief Executive Officer, and her loving and just commitment to the community that and I think it's been overwhelmingly demonstrated by the impact of COVID-19 in the African American and Latinx communities. All those numbers that she was throwing out there. While we in Louisiana, we make up 32% of the state populations. African Americans comprise 70% of the pandemic-related deaths, and that was just really a strong number that stood out. But as we say all the time, that systemic impression is the pandemic that folks of color have been dealing with their entire existence. So, it would come up in these moments that whenever there's a crisis, like a Hurricane Katrina or a global pandemic, that folks who are in poverty and folks of color suffer the most. So, those concentrated disadvantages have led to a 15 to 25 year life expectancy deficit between African American communities and the city's wealthier white neighborhoods. And these poor outcomes are not just a reflection of defective character traits, which folks try to bring up all the time, but they're willful decisions by leaders and by the colonization, the history of colonization, that have destructive results. So we have tried to come up with this program that will really foster a capacity building piece for artists and culture bearers, where they will now become community health workers, Healthcare in itself there's a mistrust that's happening in a lot of our neighborhoods between healthcare because of those disparities that I mentioned. And so now we take, culture bearers and artists who are very trusted in the communities, and now we increase their capacity by making them healthcare workers, and they're able to go into the communities, work with our folks, and get them to go see doctors, get them to go see, whoever they need to see, so that we can try to decrease those disparities and also increase the life expectancy of our community as a whole.
Can I just add, Wood, that the other part of that too is the creation of an equity toolkit for hospitals, right?
Yeah.
So that they know how to properly treat folks, so that they don't feel a lack of dignity or a lack of respect in their interactions with their healthcare providers.
I was blown away when I first learned about this particular program, because I feel like it really exemplified the infinite ways in which art can influence, whether it's personal motivation or the very technical ways that physicians and healthcare providers are interacting with patients, and everything in between. So it's so powerful how far reaching art can go for transforming outcomes. And at the same time, that art, which cannot be divorced from the artist, as I learned from Wood last week, is really reliant on relationships. For the artist to do its work, to do their work, they must be in deep connection with the people that they are creating alongside, for, etc. And so with that, would love to hear from you, because you are known amongst your community as a relationship builder. And I know that this is at the heart of what Ashé does. Ashé very much is a bridge builder between identified groups of folks in New Orleans. So, how can we take what you do so well so that people who are on the line today can begin to emulate that for themselves? I'm curious, what are some of the key questions that you ask yourself to guide how you go about growing and sustaining relationships across the city?
Sure, and I'll start with a statement. I think being of the people is the way that you understand what the people need. New Orleans has a history of, after Hurricane Katrina, we had a host of recovery saviors and disaster profiteers who came in to explain to our city how they could know what's best for us without including us. And I think vulnerability is not a weakness, but a measure of courage. So when we go into a space, being courageous enough to be open, to be present, to be honest, that does show, it shows courage. And when you show courage to your community, I think that you become one with them, and those relationships are very easy to build. But I also think timing, delivery, authenticity is important. All those good words that we artists like to use and we scholars like to use from time to time. I think the questions that we ask ourselves is simply, how do I want my community to benefit for itself? How do I want my community to be a better place where children can grow, where elders can, move on, where everyone has a pivotal role to play in making the community the best place that it could be? This is a question that art, as we think about art and culture as human development, it plays a part in breaking down the barriers of what folks may know themselves to become through their upbringing, through their learning, through schools and universities and all those different things. But when we break it down to what is the soul of a person, what moves you, what brings tears to your eyes, and most of the time it's the same thing for each of us. It's losing a loved one. It's knowing a loved one deserves better. It's knowing that I want my child or my significant other to have these things that are within the purview in the outside communities that are right a mile away, right? So if those communities can have it, why can't this community have it? So that's the kind of questions you go in to ask the community. And then when we build those relationships, we take the time to foster not only you know, what they need, but also what we need, right? What I need, you know, because we are, you know, New Orleans is not where I live, it's who I am. So all of these folks who I interact with on a daily basis, they're my family, they're my brothers, they're my sisters, they're people of the community, and we all need each other to make our community the place that we want to be. So it's that, you know, it's that collective responsibility. It's that work, you know, it's also the work of what we call cooperative economics, you know, and all those different things that we learned, you know, many of us learned coming up with different principles and things of traditions from your African ancestors all the way down to, you know, your Uncle Leroy, who might shoot dice on the corner, you know what I'm saying? All of those folks provide knowledge, you know, and our neighborhoods are natural incubators of culture. New Orleans is the kind of place where your next door neighbor might be playing the tuba on Saturday morning, just because, right? Or your cousin's best friend uncle is a Mardi Gras Indian and wants you to pick up some feathers for him so you can sew their suit. And when you provide yourself the opportunity to be within culture or be within community with all those different types of folks, then you have to build the relationships that are going to foster a better understanding of what your community needs.
Absolutely. Asali, anything you'd like to add there? I'm just noticing the nonverbal head nods and the affirmations coming through.
Oh yeah, I'm feeling everything he's saying, which is, you know, why Wood is our relationship maintainer at Ashé. You know, even amongst the staff and, you know, neighbors and everything, you know, it's a real asset to have a person. I mean, and this could be possible, you know, with anyone, but I do believe that when a person actually is from a community, that they are able to more easily make relationships in places where other people would see them as either not possible or not necessary, right? And you know, we know that those are the relationships that are at the heart of the work we're trying to achieve. So you know, as a CEO, you know, it just my heart sings with pride every time I hear, you know, Wood describe his work. So, you know, I'm amen in that.
And if I can, you know, piggyback on to throw it back to her, you know, it's very getting a little, it's very, you know, serious when your leader, you know, institutes this idea that service is as important, or if not more important than success, right? We are a space of service. That people are more important than possessions. You know what I mean? Like we say this every time we start a meeting. Like there's a mantra that we say when we start meetings at Ashé, that brings all those concepts up, and she emulates that. You know, emulates that each and every day, and it makes it easier for us to go out in the community and be of service to our folks.
Would one of you mind sharing what that opening sentiment is that is shared in meetings for all of us to hear and perhaps to bring to our spaces, honoring the work that Ashé is doing to live this out in practice?
Well, since Wood made me cry, I'm gonna ask him to go ahead and do it, please.
Okay, so this is called C for Praise, written by M. Tamisha St. Julian. May we always remember those who have gone before us. May we be inspired by their vision and valor. May their lives continuously remind us that service is more important than success, that people are more important than possessions, that principle is more important than power. May whatever we do be shaped and molded by honesty, competence, and commitment. May our children and our children's children carry forth the pride and the history of our nobility and tradition. To the creator of us all, we dedicate our lives to make this world better and more beautiful. And we ended, of course, with Ashé.
Okay.
Ashé. I think it still serves the same purpose, even if we are maybe a third of the way into our conversation. Thank you. Thank you. You know, Ashé has been around for more than 20 years now. And Asali, as the organization's, my understanding is first non-founding CEO, there's a lot that comes with that, I can imagine. Good, bad, otherwise, no judgment, really. You know, as Ashé's CEO, how have you led this transition in a way that's upheld what is absolutely central to Ashé's ethos, while also intentionally shedding any practices that may have been rooted in white supremacy culture?
Mm. So, finding the internalized white supremacy is always the hardest part, right? And, fortunately, Ashé does have an ethos of finding and dismantling those practices. We've been more successful at, identifying them outside the organization, naturally. But as a person who has been around Ashé from its founding, who's had um, a amazing relationship with both founders of the organization separately. I knew them separately before I knew them together. As Ashé, Doug Red was an artist in my neighborhood, and the Artist of Tambourine and Fan, a youth organization that I grew up in. And Carol B. Bell was, as I grew into my professional world, amazing mentor. And so to be around Ashé and to see what it meant to community and to see it grow itself from an art exhibit to an institution that's not just a model for how things are done in New Orleans, but really a national and global approach, right? What I have been able to come in and identify was just a way of moving systems, creating systems inside of the work that, you have all of these best practices for administration and for, organizations and things like that, that, don't always, kind of meet the needs of the organization. And it's closely, of course, tied into the organization's relationship with its funders. And we just happen to be in a moment where the funding community is much more open and amenable to hearing about their oppressive ways, right? So it's much less about what, because there's a self-awareness in Ashé, right, that I'm very, grateful for. So even when knowing, you're that some of the practices are not the best practices, you understand why, and you understand, why you have to do them. But now, because of that foundation, we're in a space where we can say we don't have to do that, right? It's not necessary, and we can show you why, we can show you how, and we can demonstrate that by not doing it, we have even better outcomes, and we can create not just more equity like inside of the staff and among positions and those kinds of things, and improving the relationship between creative team and operations team, and having everybody see their interconnectedness, and providing a place of growth for workers, a place of non-compete for workers, so, all of those things, and the racial equity training. And, so we're getting to do all of that, but we can also show up in a way in community, and even with those in power, that does not, where we don't feel subservient in the relationship, right? Where there's not an expectation of genuflection, between funder and funded, right? There's an equal appreciation of the mutual benefit that we provide to each other, more so, or at least we can articulate that. We can say that and be respected in the conversation, and not feel like we're risking funding being taken away or not extended. And we also understand that it is a moment. right? We don't know if this will be the moment next year. We don't know if this will be the moment in 5 years. So it's our responsibility to exploit the moment for what it is, to push and to press and to not relent until outcomes change, so that we never have to fear a regression, that we're always moving forward, right?
You know, it strikes me that, and please correct me if I'm not hearing what you're saying, but it strikes me that there's this inner knowing and willingness to work toward mutual respect for each other, and you are living that out in all aspects of your work, which is amazing. Are there any explicit examples that you'd like to name, either one of you, about what it looks like to, Asali, as you said, recognize this might be how we have done it in the past, and we don't have to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it's not in our best interest to do it in that old way. So let me show you how much farther we can go if we switch gears or
Mm-hmm.
reimagine. Are there any particular examples that you'd like to share?
I'll give two examples as particularly relates to funders, and what if you could talk about, some of the stuff we've done with staff, and any other thing you want to talk about too. But so particularly the IMLS grant that I mentioned previously is a $270,000 grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And when I first started, the way that the grant was designed, the typical way, you get the community people, you pay them a little money, but most of the funding goes to the consultants, right, who use the expertise of the community to actually come up with their working results. So, when I came in and took a look at the design of the program, I approached the consultants to say, okay, we still really need this work from you, right? But would you mind actually sharing the money in a way that's more equitable? And can I tell you what I think is equitable? I think that each of these organizations should definitely be much more fully compensated for what they're going to contribute to what you analyze, right? You're going to analyze it, but what are you analyzing? So, to their credit, each of them, and it was 3 sets of consultants, each of them agreed to a dramatic reduction in their fees, half of their fees, so that we could then quadruple the amount of money that we were giving to each community organization that participated, right? Because compensating in them is just as much part of the mission and the work as learning from them is, right? So, that was one thing that, we were particularly, happy to be able to do and to demonstrate, that even the consultants recognize, right, that, the disparity in the way that that's systemically set up. That is how you think of such proposals in academia and philanthropy and federal government. This is how we unjustly reward folks for studying other people. So and making it more of a participatory research project, and shifting the direction of the research and actually building the capacity of those organizations to be able to carry out research themselves. So just a total redesign of the project, which was great. And then the other thing is there's this a project that we've been doing with the funder for a couple of years, and it's really a really great project, but it requires a lot of work on behalf of the organization, a lot of manpower, a lot of supplies, a lot of human capital, paying of artists and all of these things. And so the amount of funding that we were receiving really didn't cover the grant, the activities of the grant itself. And when I came on board, the funder was excited about me coming on board and excited to continue the program. But when I analyzed it, I was like, this just doesn't make sense for us. So I asked for more money in my proposal, and they admitted, this is as much as we can afford, right? We can't go any further. And so after a little back and forth between, okay, what's possible, what's not, what they agreed to was a year of general operating funding, just for me to be able to figure out how to redesign the program with that amount of money, but in a way that was beneficial to us, that didn't overextend our resources, and that properly compensated us for the activities that we were doing. So, you know, what I came up with, instead of doing this 12 times a year, we'll just do this 4 times a year, right? Like, it was a monthly series. And so then we made it into a quarterly series, changed some of the deliverables and that kind of thing. But, you know, they were open to that conversation and to rethinking, you know, everything, and still being supportive through the process of that. So those were, you know, 2 challenges that I was very, you know, happy to be successful in renegotiating and have folks, you know, look at it differently.
Amazing. Yeah, so I'll just speak, you know, really quickly about the, there's something to be said about working in an authentically Black space, right? And that you can be your full authentic self, and just the dreaming of what that means. So it becomes less of a job and more of a, you know, like I think some of the staff, we think of ourselves as missionaries, right? It's like a mission project that we are in support of our community and in support of our diaspora, through the work, not because we're getting a paycheck, but because it's necessary to do this work for the survival of our, you know, we are the new ancestors, so act accordingly, right? You know, so I think, you know, we've really allowed staff to be able to dream. When we think about funding, you know, as Sally mentioned, funding, like, it goes from, you know, writing our grants to what the grant provides, whereas now we write for what we need and what our community needs, and then let the grant do what it got to do to support what we want to do, right? Instead of having, you know, a lot of times we, you know, especially, you know, we talk about funding, you know, 37% of what arts organizations, or 30, you know, it's 37% of arts organizations that deal with communities of color only get 4% of the funding, right? So, so dealing with that concept, and then you have an arts organization that's in the South, you go down another peg, and then you're a Black organization in the South, like you know, you're going down to the lowest peg on the totem pole, as they say. But instead of having that mindset that we have to write to what the grant says, we write for what our community needs and let the grant act accordingly. So that's been a real exciting step in how, you know, we think about decolonization as a concept, right? Of you know, systemic things that have always put us in a position of inferiority. And we don't think like that, because we think of our community and our staff. Also, we have these dreams, you know, we dreaming out loud, right? About what we might want and what we might need and what might look good. And then we go out and find that. And like you said, every now and again, we may have to make adjustments here and there, but we start with that mindset, not a mindset of we're not going to get what we need to accomplish this. Here's what we want to accomplish it. Let's go find what we need.
Thank you both for these very clear examples for those of us who are listening in to absorb and reimagine for our communities beyond New Orleans. But let's also stay on New Orleans. Wood, when you introduced yourself, you said you were coming to us from the land of Bobancha, the land of many tongues. And I've come to know New Orleans also as this cultural melting pot. I'm so curious to hear more about what you all do. Well, let me back it up to say, even in the midst of being a cultural melting pot, the land of many tongues, we know that dominant culture norms have not missed the city. There's like Asali was saying, the insidious nature of white supremacy, of dominant culture norms. So, you know, even the best gardens need to be weeded out from time to time, and we got to take care of those weeds. I guess I'm equating the weeding out in our personal lives to the unlearnings that happen over time, the unlearnings of mindsets, the unlearnings of practices that are no longer serving us. What do you all do with these unlearnings? Once you discover them, what do you do with them? And what should we be doing with the unlearnings as we realize this is not serving us anymore?
So the first thing to do for me is to, call them out. You have to clearly identify them and say, what they are, what impact they've had, why you're not doing it anymore, and owning it, like why I did do it, why I know not to do it, what outcome it has when this is done. Right. And like you said, it's not the tending of the garden. It's not a sometimes thing. It's all the time. The best gardens got to be best because somebody was weeding them every day or every other day, right? And so with our staff, we're constantly and as Wood always remind me, it is COVID, you know what I'm saying? So we have all of the other, things that folks are dealing with around that. So, making the space for a constant reminder, and constantly reflecting and for the emotional space as well, right? Like when you're dealing with these harsh realities, you can't deal with them in a purely, like academic, logical, reasoned, kind of way. This is the messy stuff. This is the uncomfortable stuff. This is why people don't want to talk about it and stuff, because it has tears, right? It has tears and it has slobber and it has sweat and it has, fidgeting and yelling. It has all of these things that people don't want to deal with and talk about at work, right? But we must, we must talk about it at work. We must talk about it in all the public spaces, right? Because at the end of the day, our bodies are being killed in public spaces. Our bodies are mutilated in public spaces. Our dignity is assaulted in public spaces all the time. And we can no longer take that implacably. We can no longer, as the poem goes, we wear the mask that grins and lies, that shades our cheek and hides our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile. We're no longer willing to do that as a society. And so you have to make the space for that. If we want to be able to confront our public leaders, if we want to be able to confront our corporate leaders, if we want to be able to confront our philanthropic leaders with all of these equity issues, we must be willing to confront them and have them be confronted in our own spaces as well. So, we never shut those things down.
Very well said. I mean, there's not much I can add to that. I think it's just a steady diet of the brutal and the beautiful. Like we can't, we want to be an iconic, synonymous representation of our city. Then that also comes with the history of our city. That comes with the accountability of knowing our past and what that past means and how it's historically steeped in supremacy, white supremacy from its founding, up until now. And like even in our artistic, presentation, it was really important when we did our presentation of the Maafa, which is a celebration we do that commemorates the transatlantic slave trade, the domestic slave trade. We do this every year. It was very important for yes, we want to honor our ancestors, but we also want to see, what violence and brutality looks like, what our people really had to go through, and understand that and feel that. Let it be a visceral experience for you, so you understand how important it was when they sing those songs about how they got over, right? And that it means so much to be having these moments. And it's not in hyperbole. This really happened, and it happened to people who are in your lineage and in your legacy. So, when I tell my father a statement like, oh, we added another, 4 or 5 blocks to the second line, we got to go so far. And he's like, we walked to Montgomery and we walked to Baton Rouge from New Orleans, like, it took you. So you make statements like that to elders, and they understand the truth and the power of how they got over, and then you understand that your fight, in the eyes of what fighting should be, is only just a starting point. So we, it's, as long as we live, we'll continue to learn, we'll continue to fight. We didn't begin the fight on our feet, right? We're not promised to end it on our feet, but there's wisdom on the bottom and there's glory on the rise. So we keep fighting to maintain that for the next generations to come.
Would you talk about that have maintaining this balance, this healthy diet of both the beauty, the beautiful and the brutal. I just want to give us all a moment to digest a bit of this diet that you both, Asali and Wood, are feeding us today. Just a moment to let it sink in. Thank you. Thank you. Asali, you spoke earlier about that moment when you were at the Policy Link conference and you saw these amazing experts talking about issues that you may have known personally or regardless you cared about. Would you mind talking a bit more about how you came to this understanding that art can be used to interrupt and or dismantle policies that perpetuate oppression and racism? Can you talk a bit more about how you came to that understanding and how you want to continue to use art as an interrupter, as a dismantler of racist and oppressive policies?
So, I mean, I don't know if it's I don't know if it's an understanding that I ever lacked, to be honest with you, because all the ways in which I was changed and all the ways that I most effectively was able to change others has been through art, right? So, you know, as a teacher, as a poet, you know, I've always had kind of an implicit understanding of the capabilities of art. What I think the Policy Link connection did for me was to give me, you know, kind of a more targeted articulation of one, the issues in a way, you know, so to have like those statistics that you started with, right? I can give you a million statistics like that. I could tell you, you know, that residents of the Claiborne corridor are 19.2% of the city's population, yet are 42% of the city's workforce and only have 7.6% of the healthcare facilities. You know, I could tell you that they have 44% don't have access to a vehicle. I could tell you that they're 150% below the poverty line, that less than 10% of them live within half a mile of their school. Like I could tell you those things, right? And so having that data, kind of it authenticates and it amens what you knew, you know, already, right? So it puts something behind your artwork, kind of a little more authority in a way, like it's, you know, you feel like it's more rooted, and it also identifies the issue in a way that makes it more clear what you must do, like what, you know, how you can use the art, and what exactly you're trying to dismantle. Like it's less fuzzy, right? So that's the effect that it had for me. You know, it was just, you know, kinds of delineating a lot more clearly what the issues were and who was responsible for it. So that's the other thing, like that the data did, was make me understand the systemic nature of it, you know. So it always was insidious and it always was oppressive and it always was around, but having an understanding that it is coded into the laws, right? And that unless we change those laws and we change those policies, there's nothing a person, you know, really can do. And to know that that's been demonstrated over and over and over again, to the point where we can no longer say, in my opinion, we can no longer say authentically anything about unintended consequences of laws and policies and actions, right? It is demonstrated over and over again, and by choosing to ignore it or choosing not to do your research, right, does not mean that you're absolved of the responsibility and accountability for carrying out policies that harm.
And Wood, building on this conversation regarding the use of data to inform artistic direction, in what ways do you weave in data and your awareness of policy decisions that have been made in the city when interacting with your collaborator artists? How do you bring that knowledge directly to those relationships?
I mean, I think we just provide some of that information, but I mean, you know, as Nita Simone said, it's an artist's duty to reflect the times. So a lot of our artists are living in the communities. They understand these disparities. They may not have those numbers so eloquently as Asali stated them, but they understand the feeling and the emotion of being one of those numbers. So, you know, we practice, when we say we practice art for life, right? It's not art for art's sake, it's art for life. So it's an understanding that everything that I do and everything that I'm about can make my life better and make those around me and my community's lives better. So, you know, when you write that poem, even when you're doing blocking in a play or production, you're doing it with an understanding that it's going to mean something for someone in that audience, right? So we take all of that into account, and we use that data to make folks understand that, yes, there may be need for a community mural here, because folks here have no access to art in their schools. There may be a need for a music program here because, you know, Sally will tell you that 90% of the live music venues that were once in the Treme community are now closed, right? Because of gentrification and because of different, you know, systemic things that have come about. So as we naturally, like I said, those natural incubators of culture that our neighborhoods were, as they're being systematically changed, you know, will we have the same conditions for the next society? You know, will those same conditions still exist for the next artist who will be synonymous with that neighborhood or be synonymous with that street? So we have to instill that into our artists, that your neighborhoods are important, and the art you make will also support this claim and this proof that we know is in the numbers. So let's use our voices to reflect what we want, what we need. And we do that mostly loud and proud when we're on the stage, or when we, you know, when what we give is what the city wants the most. If they're going to receive it, then we're also going to feed them what we know they should be eating. If that answers the question.
You know best. We're here to learn from you. Absolutely. So Ashé Cultural Arts Center is one part an opportunity for artists to outwardly react to what they are experiencing. As you both have exhibited, your artists are of the community. It's not about New Orleans. They are New Orleans. You are New Orleans. Ashé is also a place for reflection to a broader community about what is happening on the streets, in the community. And Ashé is also a place for imagining a redirection of mindsets, a redirection of assets and resources, so that there can be more equitable outcomes across the city. And you all are doing this in the midst of COVID. You all are doing this in the midst of what has been quite a tumultuous presidential election year. I just want to pause and say thank you. We've had climate change. We've seen the effects of climate change as well, and y'all are still doing the work. A recession, and y'all are still doing the work. Thank you, and thank you, and thank you. I don't know when you take time to care for yourselves, but I hope that you are, in ways that are meaningful to each of you. And I extend this to your staff as well.
Ashé, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that. And thank you also for mentioning climate, We are celebrating, or I should say uplifting, the climate reality that we are in New Orleans right now of, you know, dramatic land loss, urban heat island effects, and you know, sea level rise, just all kinds of things. New Orleans is projected not to be around in 20 years if some great mitigation doesn't happen. And so we have a series reflecting that this week. And it is a global issue that I hope all of us use our art to highlight and bring awareness to.
So we are sending you all of the power and strength and foresight necessary to continue to live into your mission. And so let's do a little bit of future casting if we can. Yes. How do y'all anticipate Ashé's efforts contributing toward racial equity in New Orleans looking in the next year? You know, where do you want to be in the next year? And what are some of the key milestones that are necessary to get there?
So, you know, a great part of the reason that Ashé, you know, is able to still be here and still do this work is because of the investment in us by philanthropy, right? We have great, you know, funders who have believed in us for over 20 years and, you know, supported our growth and bailed us out when it looked like we were not going to make it, and help us to make it further than we thought we were going to make it sometimes. And so, you know, that is why we've been able to do this work. And our impetus is for them to increase that investment in other organizations who have just as much potential, you know, as an Ashé. Like what you see in us, is evident in lots of organizations, and we encourage our philanthropic partners to invest in Black-led leadership, Indigenous leadership, Latinx leadership, women leadership, you know, as much as possible. But the other thing is to use what we've been able to gain to also, we have an amazing real estate portfolio, right? We you know, own significant property, high profile property in a community that's being aggressively displaced, aggressively gentrified, you know, long-term historic residents, you know, being moved out at alarming rates. And so one of the efforts that we are working on to increase economic parity is to make an investment vehicle whereby our neighbors can invest in developments in their community at the same time as wealthy developers. So this is an investment model that has been shown to have some great promise in Portland, Oregon, where community members can, invest in their neighborhoods, increasing first of all, their income, but second of all, their ability to remain in their communities. So that's something that, we're looking into and looking to get started in the next year to really build the resilience of our neighbors to stay our neighbors, and leveraging our own real estate portfolio in order to make that happen.
Yeah, and I'll just speak to, we want to be out of COVID in the next year. Just so, because artistically, we want to continue to tell Black stories in all their glory and all their morphisms and all their isms. Whether it be Afrofuturism, whether it be Sankofa, whether it be all those different things that we look back to go forward, or we look forward to go back, like whatever those Black stories may entail. We want them to be authentic. We want them to be genuine. We want to tell the story of our community and our people. And we want folks to know that Ashé is still a space where, like I said, authentic Black stories are told, and that they can be them full selves, whether it be on a stage or on a wall or on a corner. New Orleans is that sort of space, and we live and breathe art and culture. It's the soundtrack to our lives, right? It's the tones that the tone in my voice is because I'm a New Orleans artist, and it speaks to the history in all of us. It lays track to our lineage, it lays track to the legacy, not only of this city, but of our nation. Because a lot of our cultural ties, started from the root of New Orleans, and then those branches have spread all across our United of States. So to live in New Orleans is to have an intimate relationship with culture and rhythm. And I think I said in our call last time, some of you might see some of us walking to a beat that sometimes only we can hear because of that, because we're such a musical place where we sing and dance, because celebration is not only beautiful, but it's necessary, and it's every bit of who we are.
And we will share the CIFA with the group. I noticed that a lot of folks asked about the CIFA. And that's Mtimishi St. Julian, one of our beloved New Orleans artists and playwrights.
Yes, indeed.
May you continue to dance and sing and find joy and share that joy with New Orleans and beyond. Asali, Wood, it was such a pleasure to be in conversation with the both of you today. Thank you for starting off our week with this knowledge, with this healthy diet.
It is our honor and our pleasure, and we wish you all the most success in the great work that you're doing too. Thank you so much for creating this platform.
Yes, Ashé to everyone here. Ashé to you, Masharika. Thank you so much for moderating, to the National Guild for Community. We appreciate all of you folks, man. Thank y'all so much for having us, and I truly appreciate good conversation. I'm all full, and I don't even know if I need lunch now.
Lisette, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thank you, everyone. Would I also feel so full, but I will have lunch. But these conversations always fill me up, and I always have to be careful because when I get misty-eyed, then the waterworks come and then they don't stop. I don't. But I do want to uplift something you said. We are the new ancestors, so act accordingly. And so that's it. Our next conversation will be December 7th with Lion's Tooth Project. Thank you, Asali. Thank you, Wood. Thank you, Masharika. It's everything. You're all everything, and I've been loving this so much. And the love that is always on these conversations is so palpable, and it's just like love for community, but also love for each other. And it's like, when was the last time someone in your organization loved you, or you felt that? So thank you all so much, and we'll see you all again. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisette. Thank you so much for bringing us together.